Shandon Baptist Church exists to make, mature, and multiply disciples of Jesus Christ one life at a time in the Midlands and beyond.
I think it is very common to think that being a missionary means having to cross the ocean and go into some crazy unknown jungle. Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn D. Mercer Plank. In today's Shandon Plus podcast, the ability to reach your world without ever having to get even in your car. Senior pastor of Shandon Baptist, Dr. Daniel Dickard, says, start right next door. Daniel, we often think it requires getting on a plane to be a missionary. Explain why you say basically just walk across the street.
The idea of just walk across the street to be a missionary captures both the simplicity and the accessibility of living on mission. Often we think of missions work as something done overseas or by professional missionaries, but the heart of Jesus' Great Commission is for every believer to make disciples wherever they are. Donnie, I was convicted of this when I was in high school. I went overseas to Nicaragua on a mission trip, and so often on short-term trips, we think that we're going to be the blessing, but in return, we're the one that's blessed. And the Lord really opened my eyes, and while I was there, I was sharing the gospel every day. I was being a super Christian, and yet I came back, and I did not share with the same fervor and zeal that I had when I was on the trip. And God really used that to remind me that, being on mission is not just going on a trip. It's using the networks and the spheres of influence and the locations that we are here. So here's why being a missionary can be as simple as walking across the street. First of all, mission starts where we're at. Acts 1:8 reminds us of this, that mission begins locally. It says, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and all Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And for many of us, our Jerusalem is our neighborhood or workplace. There are people right outside our home who need to experience God's love. We don't need to travel afar. Just crossing the street to connect with a neighbor or coworker can open the door to gospel conversations. Here's another reason. Every interaction is an opportunity. The gospel is often shared in the context of relationship. So starting with the simple act of kindness or introducing ourselves, offering help, these are small steps that can lead to deeper conversation. Also, and this really hits home for me, obedience doesn't require perfection. Many people, I think, hesitate to share their faith because they feel unprepared or they feel rejection. But the key is obedience, not perfection. God can work through simple, everyday actions. So just walking across the street to listen, serve, or invite someone into your life reflects the heart of Christ. I would also say this, we don't need to have the title to be a missionary. Every believer is a missionary wherever they live, work, or play. And then the gospel grows through simple relational acts. As we study the early church, the gospel spread person to person, not program to program, person to person, often through simple hospitality, conversation, and acts of love. So living on mission today doesn't always require grand effort. Sometimes it's as easy as offering friendship to a neighbor next door, inviting someone over for coffee, offering to pray for a need, or simply being present in the start of a meaningful spiritual conversation.
I'm glad you were willing to share about the Nicaragua story for you, because I had mentioned to you before we started this recording of this podcast that I was really convicted after I'd gone to Mexico years ago on a mission trip and had gotten out of the habit of sharing my faith.
Right.
I was very active in sharing my faith in college after I'd become a Christian in college based on someone coming up to me just randomly and sharing the gospel. So I saw that demonstrated and did it for a while and then got out of the practice of it.
Yeah.
So when I went to Mexico, literally, we hit the ground running. And everywhere we went, I was just randomly going up to people with the gospel and explaining it. And I can't speak the language, but we had interpreters, and we had learned enough just to get by to invite them to church where Spanish-speaking people were giving the gospel presentation. So active with that. Well, what changed? I just flew somewhere.
Right.
And my mentality is what changed.
Yeah.
It's not that I couldn't do that here. So when I came back, I thought, am I doing that to my neighbors, to the people across the street like I was in Mexico. So we're doing a lot of emphasis here at Shandon Baptist on being a church that builds people up and sends them out. A lot of encouragement in all of us going on short-term mission projects. But it's a good reminder to us, do just as much in reaching the world for Christ here before you get on that plane and after you get off that plane and return.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I would add to that, we often say short-term trips ignite a lifetime love for missions. And sometimes that short spurt of being intentional helps us to be more intentional once we get back.
Good insight, right.
The short-term trips helps, I think, to recharge us to that focus of what we do there, we can also do here.
Perfect. So when we talk about reaching our neighbors with the gospel, who is our neighbor? Literally, the guys next door, the women next door?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that Jesus answered through the parable of the Good Samaritan there in Luke 10:25 through 37. So a man asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And in response, Jesus tells a story where a Samaritan, someone despised by the Jewish community in that day, helps a wounded man after religious leaders pass by without stopping. And the point of the parable is clear. Our neighbor is anyone we encounter who is in need, regardless of race, religion, or background. So here are just a few ways to understand who our neighbor is. First of all, it's anyone near us physically or relationally. Our neighbors include the people we encounter daily. That would include coworkers, friends, family, and literal neighbors living on our street. These are the people God has placed in our path, giving us natural opportunities to serve and share His love. Our neighbor also includes the vulnerable and the needy. And just like the Samaritan saw the wounded man as his neighbor, anyone in need, that means emotionally, physically, or spiritually, is our neighbor. Whether it's someone struggling with loneliness or someone seeking meaning, Christians are called to respond with compassion and help. This question of who is our neighbor, that means even those who are different from us. We've just come upon a season of political elections, and it seems like our world is just so divided right now, and us versus them mentality. But the Good Samaritan parable teaches us that our neighbors are not just those who are like us or who share our beliefs. We are called to show love across cultural, racial, and social divides, modeling the radical love of Christ. Our neighbor even includes the lost, those who are spiritually searching people. It means that those who are far from God, Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. And so our neighbor, as Jesus defines it, is anyone, and that means anyone, Dondi, God places in our path, whether they are close in need, different from us, or spiritually lost. And living on mission means loving and serving all people, not just people that we like or the subset that we identify with. No, the same compassion and grace that Jesus offers reflects His love to the world around us.
I want to get really practical here, Daniel.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask everyone listening to get out a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. And I want you to explain what a me map is. A me map.
Yeah, so right now, draw a circle in the center of a piece of paper and write your name in that circle. Now, I want you to think of the various categories that we've talked about in this podcast. I want you to write down perhaps a coworker who you live near or that you work with. I want you to write down a neighbor, the first name right now of a neighbor. I want you to write down a family member that you know that doesn't walk with the Lord. Write down a name of someone that you have recently met, maybe at a restaurant, call it a waiter or waitress. And that is your me map. A coworker, maybe a friend, a neighbor, a relative, a family member, someone that you've met just in passing. And that me map, that is just a reminder there are people all around us who are in need of Christ. So a big circle with your name on it, then some smaller circles on the outside or around your circle, and then draw a line, and that is your me map from your circle to their circle. And that is your evangelism bubble right there. That is the relational spheres that God has placed you in. And everyone should have a me map. And then the issue is connecting, making those relational connections so that you can turn everyday conversations into gospel conversations.
I like seeing it on paper like that. Yeah, I was doing it as you were reading it out, and it's the coworker, the neighbor, the relative, the person you just met. And when you see all that, you see how in every aspect of our lives, all throughout the day, we have a mission field. We have a way, we have people in front of us who need to know the gospel. So not only can being a missionary be as simple as crossing the street or investing in the lives of those around us, you see us as missionaries by not even leaving our homes. And I'm going to have you explain that. I want us also to look at, Daniel, how the early church understood the home to be a place to serve others. We, I confess, often see our homes as our quiet, safe havens away from the craziness, but you're wanting us to open up our homes to get the gospel message out there. And what a perfect time to be talking about this, as it is the week of Thanksgiving. We're going to have people in our homes, or we're going to be going into other people's homes. But talk about us making it not just our sanctuary away from the world and closing it off, but opening up our doors to get the gospel message out there.
Yeah, Dondi, in the early church, the home played a central role in living out the Christian faith. It was not just a private space for family life, but a hub for hospitality, ministry, and even discipleship. So as we embark upon Thanksgiving week, where we will be in not only our homes, but the homes of others, here are a few key ways the early believers understood the home as a place to serve others. The home, first of all, was a center for hospitality. Romans 12:13 urges believers to practice hospitality. In the first century, inns were often unsafe or inaccessible. So Christians regularly opened their homes to travelers, missionaries, and fellow believers. For example, Aquila and Priscilla used their home to host Paul and other believers in Acts 18. And they also had house churches, as we see in 1 Corinthians 16. So hospitality was a tangible way to serve and build community. Also, homes and hospitality, it was used for house churches for worship and fellowship. Now, you may not be holding a public worship service, but even a Bible study in your home. Since Christians were often persecuted and formal church buildings did not exist, believers gathered in homes for worship, for prayer, for teaching, and even for the Lord's Supper in Acts 2:46. So these home gatherings allowed for intimate fellowship and the growth of personal relationship. I even think about the book of Philemon. Philemon hosted a church in his home, and reflecting how homes were key locations for spiritual life and community outreach. Also, homes serve as a place of refuge and ministry. Homes were used to care for the poor, for widows, for orphans, and the sick, demonstrating compassion and mercy to those who were in need. The church embodied Christ's love by meeting the practical needs of the vulnerable within their communities. Dondi, I learned not long ago, many of us perhaps have gone to QT or another gas station to fill up on gas. And I learned years ago that QT was one of the only places that had a safe space for those who were seeking refuge, that perhaps those who were victims of abuse, that they actually, when they first built QT, that they had places where you could go in anonymity if you needed to make a phone call if you were hurt.
Did not know that.
I didn't realize that either until I did a study on that. And then to think, it's sad when a gas station is more of a place of refuge than the church or a home.
Yeah.
And so as Christians, let's not allow gas stations like QT to outdo us when it comes to the ministry of hospitality. I would also add a couple more. Family discipleship and evangelism. The early church viewed the home as a primary place for discipleship and evangelism, starting with the family and extending outward to friends and neighbors. To those parents out there, don't miss the opportunity. Grandparents, don't miss the opportunity to instruct your kids in the Word of God. One of the things we're doing right now in my home, I think this is one of those confession times. We're going through Psalms right now, and you may say, why are you going through Psalms? Well, we told our son, Conrad, that Psalm 119 was the longest verse in chapter in the Bible, and he wants to stay up late right now. He doesn't think that it's fair that he wants to be able to stay up till 10, 11 o'clock at night. And so we told him, we said, well, we go through the Bible in an intentional sequential order. So he wants to stay in Psalm so that one of these nights he can stay up a long time through Psalm 119. So he's just waiting for that day, Psalm 119.
Yeah.
But right now we're in Psalm 75 tonight.
Right.
So we are slowly plodding through the
Yes.
Psalms. But that's just a great opportunity every night. You know, some of our greatest
That's so
discipleship
neat.
moments is going through the Psalms, and we're in the part where David is offering these prayers where he's alone in these caves and he's going through difficult times, and it just opens up great conversation. So the home is a place for discipleship and evangelism. And hey, even if the motivation right now is for my 9-year-old son to stay up later, it's still a great chance for us to be able to share the gospel. Also, the home as a model of Christian learning. We know that our kids are constantly looking at us. And so early Christians understood that living out the gospel in their homes through love, service, and hospitality served as a powerful testimony to the watching world. So these are just a few examples of how we can use the home as a place where faith is lived out, shared, and multiplied.
Awesome. You know, you talk about not missing the opportunity. You talked about the advantages, but I wonder how much are we limiting ourselves when we don't have a vision for how our homes can be used as a mission field?
When we overlook the potential of our homes as a place of ministry, I think, to your point, Donnie, we miss powerful opportunities to advance God's kingdom in simple but impactful ways. I can just think of 4 ways that limiting our view of the home can hinder our ability to serve others and share the gospel effectively. I think, first of all, just missed opportunities for genuine relationships. Ministry often happens through relationships, and the home offers a personal, inviting space for building deeper connections. Now, we're not saying, and I'm not saying, that there are superficial relationships on Sunday when we gather, but there's something personal about a home. And without a vision for hospitality, we miss the chance to engage our neighbors and friends. Also, the loss of everyday evangelism. Sharing faith isn't just organized church activity. It happens in everyday moment, and it can happen in the home. Also, limited discipleship and spiritual growth. The home is a natural setting, again, for small group discipleship and spiritual conversations. What if we hosted a Bible study or a prayer group in our home that allowed for more frequent, authentic spiritual growth rather than just waiting for Sunday services? Also, the reduced influence in the community. When we don't see our homes as mission fields, I think we limit our impact in our local community. And then just neglecting God's call to stewardship. God has given us our homes as resources to be used for His glory. And when we don't have a mission-minded vision for our homes, we risk hoarding these blessings rather than using them to bless others or expand God's kingdom. So hosting missionaries or students or neighbors for gospel impact that might otherwise not happen if we limit our homes for personal comfort. So let's move beyond just personal comfort, not hoarding these blessings, but instead of using them for the sake of the good news.
And Daniel, there was a time when those far from God had a general respect for the church, but with those days quickly evaporating, it's tougher to get people into a church building to hear the gospel. So this should encourage us in knowing the home front is more powerful than ever.
Yeah, we talked about the post-Christian era that we are currently living in, and I think it's an easier invite, it's a softer invite, being able to ask neighbors to come over and look for those opportunities, even if it's as simple as come over and watch a baseball game or a football game. That can start a conversation. And, it may be a hard invite to get someone who is far from God to show up at a church service. but getting them into your home is not that difficult. So don't see your home as a castle or a place of refuge. We open our garage, we go in, and we stay there as hermits until we leave again.
Shut the door, click.
Shut the door, click. That's exactly right. But what if it were to be used for hospitality, and not just hospitality and evangelism, even in discipleship, being able to invite those in your Sunday groups and family groups or those who are in your church. I just think that the home is an intimate setting where if we use it properly, it can be used for great purposes.
And to all the women out there listening right now, I know some of you are thinking what I'm thinking, but I've got to clean the house first before people come over. And the reality is, when I've gone into people's homes and things aren't perfectly in place, I don't notice it. I notice the hospitality. I notice the warmth. I'm not looking at, the kids' beds aren't made, or there's stuff out in the in the sink and not put in the dishwasher. So it's always a good reminder to me, my house does not have to be perfect before someone comes over.
That's right. It's not a showroom home. You live in it. You just show your authenticity when, if everything looks picture perfect, people know, well, that's not our life. So now we're not saying that, hey, try to mess up the house. I'm not going to tell my kids to mess up the house. They gladly would do that, by the way.
No doubt.
But at the same time, just the reality, we live in the home.
As we wrap up, we don't want our listeners to be discouraged if every conversation does not turn into a gospel conversation. You mentioned like coming over for a baseball game. It may not turn into a gospel conversation, but explain why talking about everyday matters like sports or education, science, even politics can come from a biblical worldview.
Yeah, I think there are key reasons why Christians can and even should discuss these topics from a biblical perspective. Most notably, Dondi, God's truth applies to every area of life. As I often like to say, all truth is God's truth. So, since all truth is God's truth, the Bible provides principles that apply to every area of human experience. Scripture speaks to how we seek knowledge, exercise authority, and care for creation. So, education, scientists, and yes, even politics are not outside of God's influence, but are opportunities to reflect His truth. Now, I think that we need to use wisdom here, yet at the same time, I think it's important for people who don't know the Lord to see how the Bible speaks to every key issue in life. Also, Christians are called to be salt and light, which means engaging with culture to promote truth and justice and goodness. One of my favorite verses is Micah 6:8, which says, "Seek justice and love mercy, walk humbly with God." That phrase, love mercy, we named our oldest daughter after that phrase, Kesed. That's where you find the word. It's the Hebrew Hesed, and we said, well, a hard guttural Hesed wouldn't be very good, so Kesed, the English transliteration. But we love that verse of seek justice and love mercy. Is Kesed. So engaging with the culture to promote truth and justice and goodness. Also, a biblical worldview promotes human flourishing, and even those who are unbelievers. I think part of the argument for God is that a Christian worldview promotes flourishing, and I don't know that you can say that about every worldview out there. So for folks to be able to see that Christianity is good, and not just the ontological reasons, but what some theologians would call the teleological reasons for the argument of God, the purpose of God, that it ends up accomplishing human flourishing.
Yes,
and
I'm pulling out my dictionary.
There we go.
Now.
Right now, the
Wait,
professor.
what?
I just did a deep dive into the professor world. The ontological argument, the teleological argument, the cosmological.
Saying, those aren't real words.
That's exactly right. Okay, back on track here, and then also engaging real world issues, which displays faith in action. When Christians thoughtfully address education, science, and politics through a biblical lens, they demonstrate that following Christ impacts every part of life, showing the relevance of faith in shaping meaningful dialogue and decision-making. So, yes, I think that being able to show how a biblical worldview acknowledges that God is the creator and sustainer of life, whether through education, science, or politics, that we can and should engage these thoughts through the lens of Scripture.
Awesome. So as we talk about this, how many of you see Sunday morning worship at church as the end of your weekend, and Monday starts a new week, right? In our next Shandon Plus podcast, we're going to see why Sunday church is not the finish line of a Christian's week. It is actually the beginning. It is the fuel to start our next week of being on mission. And if you'd like to learn more, come visit us if you're not already a member. We are at 5250 Forest Drive in Columbia with services and Sunday groups at 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. For Shandon Plus Podcast, I'm Daunte Mercer-Plank.
And I'm Daniel Dickard, Senior Pastor of Shandon Baptist Church, signing off. We'll see you next week.